In Japan's 5,000-year history, no foreign army had ever taken control of Japanese territory. But in late 1944, American war planners were preparing to challenge that record. Just 650 miles from Tokyo, the small Pacific island of Iwo Jima, only 8 square miles of volcanic rock and ash, was firmly Japanese territory and became a key objective for both sides. Its strategic value came from its airfields and its role as an early warning system for detecting American bombing raids on Japan's home islands. Since the summer of 1944, these islands had been targeted by long-range American B-29 Superfortress bombers flying from bases in the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The U.S. Air Force wanted Iwo Jima as a base for fighter escorts that would accompany the B-29s on their missions over Japan. Additionally, the island would serve as a vital staging point for the eventual Allied invasion of Japan. Japanese Imperial Headquarters, expecting this invasion, ordered Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi to defend the island at all costs. His task was to delay the Americans, inflict heavy casualties, and buy time for Japan to prepare its home defense. Kuribayashi, a skilled and experienced strategist who had learned from past island campaigns in the Pacific, abandoned the traditional Japanese defensive tactics that had failed in the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands. His forces would not engage the Americans at the beaches nor launch futile suicidal charges. Instead, they would make use of Iwo Jima's rugged terrain, camouflaged positions, and interlocking fields of fire to fight from deep within the island. To carry out this strategy, the 21,000 Japanese troops built an extensive network of 11 miles of fortified tunnels connecting 1,500 rooms, including artillery positions, bunkers, ammunition stores, and pillboxes. The tanks under Colonel Baron Takechi Nishi were embedded as fixed artillery. While the main defenses were established in the northern part of the island, Kuribayashi also fortified the southern area around Mount Suribachi as an independent stronghold because the connecting tunnel was never completed. Nearly every part of the island could be targeted by hidden Japanese artillery and mortars. A few kamikaze aircraft were also assigned to support the defenders. Every Japanese soldier was expected to fight to the death. Surrender was forbidden. And each was instructed to take at least 10 Americans with them before dying. On October 3rd, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff ordered Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, to prepare for the invasion of Iwo Jima early the next year. Iwo Jima, which means Sulphur Island in Japanese, would be the target of an amphibious assault by a force more experienced, better equipped, and more heavily supported than any launched in the Pacific War up to that point. The Fifth Fleet, under Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance, would control the air and sea around the island, while 74,000 Marines would land, outnumbering the defenders 3-1. Although American planners anticipated stiff resistance, they believed the operation, named Operation Detachment, would take about 1 week. The 3 Marine divisions involved were even scheduled to begin preparing for an invasion of Okinawa just 30 days after landing. However, the defense of the Philippines proved more difficult than expected, delaying the Iwo Jima assault by a month. Kuribayashi used the extra time wisely. Experienced Japanese engineers, including veterans from the China campaigns, helped him expand and reinforce the island's defenses. The soft volcanic rock allowed for rapid tunneling, and some underground positions reached 5 levels deep. Mount Suribachi itself, rising 556 feet above the island, eventually housed a 7-story underground complex. Kuribayashi stockpiled weapons, ammunition, radios, fuel, and food, though fresh water remained scarce. American intelligence underestimated Japanese troop strength, believing the island could only support 13,000 defenders, when in fact, Kuribayashi had many more under his command. Vice Admiral Spruance chose experienced leaders for the invasion. Rear Admiral Harry Hill commanded Task Force 53, the attack force, While Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner oversaw Task Force 51, the Joint Expeditionary Force of nearly 500 ships. The ground force, known as the V Amphibious Corps, was led by Marine Major General Harry Schmidt and composed of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions. When General Holland "Howlin' Mad" Smith was asked to assume command of ground operations, he accepted, though he criticized the limited support arrangements. Starting on December 8th, B-29s, B-24 Liberators, and naval vessels began bombarding Iwo Jima. Over 70 days, the island endured around 22,000 shells and 6,400 tons of bombs. Yet Smith requested an additional 10 days of naval bombardment, arguing that even the heaviest air raids would not be enough. His request was denied due to logistical constraints and concerns about losing the element of surprise. He was told that the Navy would provide just 3 days of preparatory bombardment. Frustrated, Smith warned that his men would face hell on the beaches, and that would only be the beginning. Nimitz, unable to spare more ships, held firm, believing that despite the expected casualties, the Marines would take the island. When the preliminary bombardment began on February 16, 1945, it failed to meet expectations. Poor weather limited visibility, and only half-day bombardments were possible on the 1st and 3rd days. Smith, haunted by the memory of hundreds of Marines floating dead in the lagoon at Tarawa in 1943, feared a repeat. Spruance admitted that the Navy had not fully supported the Marines, but hoped the attack would still succeed. He believed that at Tarawa, the problem had been poor aim rather than lack of firepower. On Iwo Jima, it became clear that the Japanese gun positions were so well hidden and protected that even heavy bombardment did little damage. Only about 200 of the estimated 915 fortifications were destroyed, and many smaller, deadly strongholds remained intact. The only viable landing zone was a stretch of black volcanic sand beaches on the island's southeast coast. These beaches were overlooked by high ground to the north and south, including Mount Suribachi, leaving the Marines dangerously exposed. Nevertheless, Schmidt chose to land 2 divisions side by side, 4th Division on the right and 5th Division on the left, while keeping the 3rd Division in reserve offshore. On February 17th, in a daylight reconnaissance mission, American underwater demolition teams approached the beaches in lightly armed craft. The Japanese defenders on Mount Suribachi opened fire, but despite losses, the teams completed their task and found no underwater mines. Their approach also exposed many hidden Japanese positions to Navy spotters. On D-Day, February 19th, at 6:40 a.m., 450 ships opened fire in a massive close-range bombardment, launching shells ranging from 5 to 16 inches in diameter. Some targeted the beaches, while others hit Mount Suribachi and the Motoyama Plateau. Then came waves of rockets, carrier planes, and heavy bombers from the Marianas, dropping additional bombs and napalm across the landing areas. While the firing paused briefly and ships adjusted their positions to protect the incoming invasion force, 50 gunboats and 10 destroyers joined the bombardment. 10 minutes later, they moved as close to the shore as possible. At that moment, the first of 5 assault waves appeared about 5,500 yards from the coast. Landing ships lowered their ramps as the naval shelling peaked in intensity. Each wave included 69 armored amphibious tractors, known as LVTs or AMTR-ACs, each carrying about 20 troops. These vehicles could cross coral reefs and began firing their 75mm howitzers as soon as they passed the departure line. One vehicle had a grim message painted on its ramp in large letters: "Too late to worry." The 4th Marine Division advanced on the right and the 5th on the left, making up the first wave. At first, they moved toward the coast with little resistance. After 30 minutes at sea, the first Amtraks reached the beach at 8:59 a.m. Around 8,000 troops landed at the designated beaches without facing the kinds of obstacles seen at previous invasions, like deadly tides or reef barriers. The Marines initially believed it might be an easy battle due to the light enemy fire, but they were quickly stopped by two unexpected physical obstacles: a steep 15-foot terrace that was hard to climb and soft, black volcanic ash. Iwo Jima is a volcanic island, and its beaches were steep. Although the surf zone was small, it was violent due to the nearby deep water. Most armored vehicles and rocket launchers became stuck in the soft ash. Many Amtraks were stranded before they could unload, and heavy waves rolled in, tipping them sideways and filling them with sand and water. The shoreline soon looked like a junkyard. When the beaches became clogged with landing craft and infantry jammed up at the terrace, the Japanese defenders fired signal flares. Then they launched their own rolling artillery attacks, firing every 5 minutes from hidden guns and mortars. Despite the chaos, the Marines kept advancing in small, scattered groups. Enemy fire came from all directions: pillboxes, bunkers, and tunnels. Japanese soldiers disappeared into one tunnel and popped up from another. The Marines fought to the death in every bunker, tossing grenades and firing point blank. U.S. Navy ships provided fire support, accurately destroying enemy positions closest to the shore. Facing the 4th Division were 10 reinforced concrete blockhouses, 7 hidden artillery sites, and 80 pillboxes. Hidden landmines also caused serious damage. One of the first-day casualties was Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, one of the most famous non-commissioned officers of the Pacific War. Basilone had returned to combat after receiving the Medal of Honor and completing a war bond tour in the U.S. He asked to rejoin active duty and was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 27th Marines. He was killed by machine gun fire on Red Beach 1 and was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Engineers destroyed damaged vehicles and cleared paths for more troops. Beachmasters worked to maintain order. M4. Sherman tanks managed to come ashore after some Amtraks moved heavy equipment off the beach. Despite the destruction, offloading continued, and communication lines remained open. To ease pressure on the front line, reserve forces were deployed by mid-afternoon. By nightfall, 30,000 troops had landed, and each regimental combat team brought artillery ashore. Despite injuries, gunners moved 105mm and 75mm howitzers across the beach while under fire. By the end of the day, commanders confirmed their artillery was in place and supporting the front line. That evening, aboard a command ship 2 miles offshore, Generals Turner and Schmidt were cautiously optimistic. Although there were 2,400 casualties, the landings went better than those at Tarawa or Saipan. Both generals expected a large-scale Japanese counterattack that night, but General Kurabayashi forbade any suicidal charges. The Marines were spared from a major Banzai attack, though smaller ones came later. Instead, small Japanese units snuck into Marine lines each night, looking for weak spots and attacking silently. The battle dragged on due to the defenders' discipline and their strategy of waiting for Marines to enter their kill zones. The first night was described by Time Life correspondent Robert Sherrod as a nightmare. Illumination shells from U.S. destroyers gave the defenders light to target Marines. Medical teams worked under fire. One unit lost 11 of 26 men, another lost 2 doctors and 16 corpsmen. Within the first 18 hours, around 2,312 Americans had died. Back in Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was visibly shaken after receiving early reports. On the second day, the Marines resumed their assault following a 50-minute naval bombardment. Progress slowed. Colonel Harry Livers's 28th Regiment made repeated attempts to approach Mount Suribachi, but gained only 200 yards that day. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, reported that every 10 feet contained a pillbox. Few were destroyed by supporting fire, so Marines had to take them one by one at great cost. Kurabayashi had instructed his troops to defend Iwo Jima to the end, destroy men and weapons, and use guerrilla tactics even as the last survivor. His message to Mount Suribachi's defenders was his final communication. The mountain became isolated when Marine engineers cut communication cables. By D+3, cable lines were installed, and the 28th Regiment pushed close to Mount Suribachi with help from Naval and Air Forces. Kurabayashi had assigned just under 1,900 men to defend the mountain, knowing it would be cut off early. However, he had fortified it with hundreds of bunkers, pillboxes, and cave systems. Marines had to use explosives, flamethrowers, mortars, and rockets to capture each position. Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers played a crucial role. In some caves, the Marines even poured seawater and gasoline. Meanwhile, the aircraft carriers USS Saratoga and USS Bismarck C came under kamikaze attack. Saratoga was badly damaged but remained afloat. Bismarck C suffered multiple explosions and fires and had to be abandoned, with about 200 sailors killed. On the morning of the fourth day, elements of the 28th Marines finally captured Mount Suribachi, whose defenses had been broken down by continuous attacks. At 10:20 a.m. on February 23rd, a team led by First Lieutenant Harold Schreer reached the summit and raised an American flag. Sergeant Louis Lowry photographed the moment for Leatherneck magazine. Later, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the iconic image of the second flag raising that would become one of the most famous photos in American history. Marines across the island cheered, rang bells, blew horns, and celebrated the capture of the mountain. But there was still a bloody month of fighting left in the larger battle. When the soldiers saw the American flag raised, they cheered from their attack positions below and continued their push north. Schmidt gave the order to bring the 3rd Marine Division to the center of the line and onto the island. He had come ashore himself to take direct command of the largest Marine unit ever assembled under one command. Even though only about 2,600 yards of enemy-held territory remained, it was clear that every foot of it would be costly. The plateau area had been turned into a heavily fortified base. After nearly a year of preparation, the Japanese had positioned plenty of mortars, artillery, and rockets, including the massive 320mm spigot mortar that launched 700-pound shells, larger than anything the Marines had seen before. Complex bunkers, caves, and pillboxes were everywhere. The defenders were well-trained and determined, willing to die under tanks with explosives strapped to their bodies, sneak behind American lines, or fight to the very last man. Admiral Turner later described the defenses at Iwo Jima as being as strong, if not stronger, than any fixed fortifications in the world. The fight for the northern half of the island became a brutal struggle. The Japanese used their fortified positions and expert concealment to their advantage, while the Americans relied on superior firepower. Generals Howland Mad Smith and Schmidt made several visits to the front lines and witnessed the horrors firsthand. It became the most brutal and costly battle in Marine Corps history. Smith later said they still hadn't found a reliable method to eliminate defenders in tight spaces, so the Marines had to clear them out in hand-to-hand combat. One Marine artillery officer lamented that there had to be a better way. The savage nature of the fighting was evident at the battle for the 2nd Airfield, near the island's center. The Japanese had built hundreds of hidden pillboxes and firing positions that resisted the Americans' concentrated attacks. Tanks couldn't operate in the rough terrain, so 2 battalions from the 21st Marine Regiment rushed in on February 24th using grenades and bayonets. After firing from cover, Japanese soldiers would dash out to engage with their own bayonets. Initially, the Marines were pushed back, but they regrouped and launched another attack. Casualties climbed on both sides, but by nightfall the next day, the airfield was under American control, and the Marines moved toward Minami Village. To their right stood Hill 382, known ominously as the meat grinder due to how hard it was to capture. The fighting there was as intense as ever. American units had to first secure the central portion of the enemy lines, but each advance was met with harsh resistance. The terrain in that sector made it nearly impossible to call in accurate naval gunfire or to use tanks and artillery effectively. Marine infantry were left with the dangerous and exhausting job of clearing the area one step at a time. Marine units were drained and battered, some operating at only 30% of their original strength. The operation had already stretched far beyond the 10 days General Schmidt had estimated. Under constant enemy shelling and infiltration attacks, the three Marine divisions paused to regroup and rest as much as they could on Sunday, March 5th. That same day, they witnessed a B-29 bomber make an emergency landing on the newly captured airfield after returning from a Tokyo raid with a fuel valve malfunction. By then, the situation for the Japanese was desperate. Kurabayashi's forces resorted to throwing themselves beneath tanks with explosives. Most of their tanks, guns, and two-thirds of their officers were gone. Still, the Marines kept advancing, and Kurabayashi's communication system slowly began to break down. Isolated Japanese officers often reverted to attack mode without orders, which left them vulnerable to American artillery. On the night of March 8th, the 4th Marine Division repelled an attack by 1,000 Japanese naval troops, killing over 800 of them. A 3rd Marine Division patrol reached the northeastern coast on March 9th and returned with a sample of seawater to prove they had split the Japanese lines. The American advance could no longer be stopped, though the Japanese refused to surrender. Increasing small-scale suicide charges were the only signs of their desperation. Kurabayashi's reports from the time reflect the situation. On March 10th, he wrote that bombardment was so fierce he couldn't describe it. On March 15th, he estimated only 900 men were left in the northern districts. On March 14th, the Americans raised the flag and declared Iwo Jima occupied, assuming organized resistance had ended. However, many Japanese continued hiding in underground tunnels and caves. Kurabayashi addressed the last survivors on March 17th, telling them to keep fighting for the emperor and not to think of themselves. On that same day, American commanders officially declared the island secured, even as Kurabayashi gave his final message. Though the Marines had taken the island, it came at a massive price. There were 24,127 American casualties, including 4,189 dead and 19,938 wounded in less than 27 days. Admiral Nimitz said that uncommon valor was a common virtue among the Americans who fought there. Generals Howland Madsmith and Schmidt left the island that same day on Nimitz's private transport. Smith told reporters at Pearl Harbor that the Marines had proven they could take anything the Japanese threw at them. Watching the assault reminded him of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. The final cleanup took until March 26th, 34 days after the initial landing, using tanks, flamethrowers, demolition teams, and rifle fire to root out remaining resistance. Just hours before Schmidt declared the operation over, a group of 350 well-armed Japanese soldiers had broken into a rear Marine camp, killing 200 before being wiped out. First Lieutenant Harry Martin was killed while taking out a Japanese machine gun nest and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, one of 27 awarded for Iwo Jima, the most for any single Marine Corps battle. Though Kurabayashi's body was never found, some believed he led the final attack. Schmidt handed control of the island over to the Army's 147th Infantry Regiment, and the Marines began to withdraw. Long after the battle ended, Japanese soldiers were still emerging from hiding and surrendering. Out of the original force, only 1,083 Japanese survived. The American public was stunned by the brutality of the fight. Newspapers speculated that General MacArthur, known for taking care of his troops, would replace Nimitz and Spruance. But there was no time for blame. The invasion of Okinawa began just 4 days after the fall of Iwo Jima and would be just as violent. With Iwo Jima secured, all of the Joint Chiefs' strategic goals were met. The island could now be used as an emergency landing site, allowing American B-29s to carry heavier bomb loads and reduce fuel reserves. For the first time, fighters based on the island could escort bombing raids all the way to the Japanese mainland. Every Japanese island, including Hokkaido, was now within bomber range. Was it worth the human cost? Between the capture of Iwo Jima and the return of 2,400 Air Force pilots who landed there, the answer seemed certain. One pilot said he thanked God and the Marines every time he landed there. In just 36 days in 1945, 74,000 Americans and 21,000 determined Japanese defenders fought over a small and seemingly unreachable Pacific island. Nearly a third of the assault force, 2,851 Americans, were killed. In total, 6,821 Americans were killed, wounded, or went missing. Against all odds, American courage and sacrifice overcame Japanese fortifications. One historian later described the assault as throwing human flesh against reinforced concrete.